Leadership Network, our Federal Asset Management Implementation webinar series. And today we have a very interesting Lifecycle Work Group webinar with Lisa Cooley from the Gordian Group, which owns RS Means. They're a sponsor. Thank you for your sponsorship. We also have Robert Smith from Commissioning Agents, who are also a sponsor. And Bob is the head of the Organization People Work Group, so we're going to be talking about some of the relations. Bob Kaler's been a longtime supporter of the Asset Leadership Network, and Sunflower Systems sponsored our event last year. And he's joining in a discussion, and James Dieter is here for that also. And sorry, I forgot to mention that this webinar series is sponsored by Onuma Inc. Thank you to the Onuma team for making this event possible. It's been going very well. And also, as a point of housekeeping, there's a place for questions. Please enter your questions as they come to you. We'll try to address them in real time or at the end of the presentation. So I am Michael Bordenaro. I'm Communications Director with the Asset Leadership Network, and I have my 1-minute overview of ISO 55000, which is a management system standard. It's not a technical standard. And there's 3 key sections: the overview, ISO 55001, which is the requirements, and then the guidelines for application is 55002. And the 7 main asset management systems: the second are organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance, evaluation, improvement. And here's where life cycle is mentioned. It's in ISO 55000 6.2.2. When you're planning to achieve asset management objectives, you have to determine and document management over the life cycle. So it's a very simple statement, but it's very hard to do. And what we did was look to the Institute of Asset Management and establish work groups based on their model of asset management. And our work groups created recommendations that were presented to the new administration at the end of last year. And this year we're working on implementation, and the series includes some special presentations, which includes the Building Smart Alliance Thought Leadership team. We have Kimono Onuma, who's the chair of the Thought Leadership, and he's going to tell us a little bit about next week's presentation.
Thanks, Mike. Next week we're going to have 4 members of the Thought Leadership from Building Smart Alliance talking about data, buildings, and assets. And we'll have presentations from a project in Shanghai, the Walt Disney Project, Field Notes from Shanghai by Dara Duragi. We'll have Finance Jernigan, author of Big BIM 4.0, James Salmon, and myself, Kimono Onuma, talking about assets and data and standards and how do we get this all working. And one theme would be about open source tools that can help us make this happen. So we look forward to next week's presentation. I look forward to today's presentation as well.
All right, well, thank you, Kimon. That'll be fun next week. And yeah, looking forward to that also. So this is where Jack Kelly usually comes in. Jack is not able to join us today, but I'm going to try to do my best impersonation of Jack Kelly and say that while ISO 55000 is the most comprehensive document on asset management that Jack has found, and he had been working on this for his 36-year career with the Office of Management and Budget, when he saw this conceptual model from the Institute of Asset Management, everything kind of clicked together for him. And in his absence, I'm going to do a little deeper dive into this conceptual model, which comes from the Institute of Asset Management and Anatomy. And so they have the different categories and subcategories. Life cycle has its own category, but then it is also a subcategory of decision making. You have to have life cycle value realization. And in chapter 2, what is asset management? Right at the very beginning, 2.1, it points to life cycle being involved in asset management from its modern inception in the 1880s. So Lifecycle is core to asset management, and here's this part of decision making and how Lifecycle value realization fits into decision making. So Jack highly recommends reading this Institute of Asset Management Anatomy. And here this shows that Lifecycle is the bulk of it. And although this slide is upside down and backwards, it indicates that you can use these tools to create checklists for what you have done, what you've done well, what you haven't done, what you need to do better. And I thought that was an important image to present. And then Jack would say that what he's learned from all this is to be successful, you have to consider lifestyle changes versus band-aids. It's not that we won't be needing band-aids, but good asset management is really getting your body healthy as opposed to just healing one part of it. And that the big picture perspective is important, but these principles can be important for specific asset types. And he feels there's real good rubber hitting the road capabilities with this. And he emphasizes that these are principles, they're not guidance, and different people will answer different elements of these aspects of these asset management elements and could get their own results and have good success that would be totally different than somebody else's good results in their success. And the federal opportunity exists because ISO 55000 is being widely recognized and adopted. There is assurance that things can be done right when you use these types of systems. The ISO 55000 really focus on supporting the mission and the objectives of the organization, and that's a great opportunity, and it can help our federal government realize value from its assets in ways that it has not before, and that could help us with our financial issues. So now we'd like to welcome Lisa Cooley from the Gordian Group. And Lisa, while you say a little bit about yourself, I'll switch slides over to your presentation.
You got to unmute.
Oh, Lisa, if you could start over.
I apologize. I was on mute before. My apologies. So I'll begin again. I'm Lisa Cooley. I am the Director of Federal Solutions at Gordian. Many of you probably know us better as RS Means, the construction and facilities cost data source that is an industry standard. RS Means was purchased by Gordian almost 3 years ago now, and so now we are one combined group and going to talk a little bit about the growth of our data sets under Gordian and specifically in relation to Lifecycle Delivery. I'm delighted to be here today, delighted to have discovered Asset Leadership Network and been involved in the Lifecycle work group last fall. And with that, Mike, maybe you can put forward one slide. I wanted to do kind of a quick review of the work group this year. Will be focusing on two critical topics. One is data in support of lifecycle management, and the other is outsourcing. And I feel like both of these are very timely. The way that we use data is and has been transforming with advanced computing power. I try not to use the term big data. It's a little overused, but certainly our ability to absorb, house, and analyze data is ever increasing, and that has implications for all of asset management, but especially the lifecycle delivery. At the same time, we have limited budgets and people resources. The old way of asset management was very time intensive and labor intensive to do cyclical inspections and facility condition assessments. I firmly believe that we are on the cusp of new systems, new solutions that will allow us to manage and assess assets, our real property assets in more effective ways. And so, you know, I think the data, the collection of data, both real property data, and then obviously our area of expertise is the cost data that ties to the other real property data. But we really are at a transformational stage when it comes to the data piece. And then outsourcing, you know, we have finally come out of the hiring freeze, but it's clear that that this is just a continuation of federal outsourcing. You know, it's been really a long trend of federal outsourcing, and the hiring freeze, you know, has been lifted, but it's really a little bit more of a slow thaw, complete lifting, and I think that you will continue to see trends towards outsourcing in asset management. And then I had to note that really strategic sourcing and category management, you know, which is a government-wide initiative, really operate at the intersection of data and outsourcing. So category managers have the mandate to collect data on prices paid and be able to analyze and more effectively spend government dollars. But most of those with category management through, especially GSA, Federal Acquisition Service, that is an outsourcing function. So I wanted to quickly review the output of last year's working group, where we explored this idea of lifecycle delivery and how data informs lifecycle delivery. So, you know, we have a cost data source, and clearly RS Means is one industry standard cost data source. It's not the only one. But we talked last fall about the need to make the data smarter, to use some of the new technology resources that are available to us today, to make the data smarter as it and improve the data as it goes through the asset life cycle. And really, data applies throughout the IAM model. Clearly, it's a very big part of asset management decision making, but then also through the life cycle delivery. And the idea is that you need a very consistent data source, but it needs to be dynamic. It needs to keep up with current prices paid. And also that you have an industry standard data set, but that you are able to tailor that and customize it for unique facility assets. So you need an underlying standard, but you need the ability to customize that for very different facility assets. And then, you know, ideally, as you are using that cost data to predict costs through the facility life cycle, ultimately, we need a feedback loop that allows for continuous refinement and improvement in the fidelity of that data. And there are some very exciting developments around, obviously, data collection and analysis, but also sensors and monitors, rather than relying on visual inspection, cyclical inspection, the idea of using sensors and monitors to provide that feedback. Predictive maintenance testing, and, you know, eventually machine learning plays into all of this, and the idea that we can continuously improve the data by monitoring and validating its use throughout the life cycle. So that was kind of where we ended up after the working group last fall, was really focused on the data in these three components of the IAM model. Next slide, Jim. Or Mike, I'm sorry.
Oh, one too far. And so we have, not that you need to answer this right now, but if you could think about how does this serve shared services. That came from when you were talking about outsourcing. So
okay.
Later on when we talk about that, we'll talk about shared services.
Okay, great. So at Gordian, we now have different types of data. We have the RS Means data that's so familiar to all, but we also have benchmarking data from our Sightlines business line, another company that was acquired by Gordian, and we have what Gordian has long produced, which is called a construction task catalog, which is simply a more granular and contractually precise and customized set of data. And then finally, we have a new advanced analytics department that is doing some really interesting work with predictive costing. And at Gordian, we're really looking at what is the right kind of data to use when over a project life cycle. So, we are very real property asset focused and really construction and facility maintenance focused. And so, in our world, we have our own version of the life cycle, which is really focused on a project, a construction project. And so we are considering very deeply what is the right kind of data to use for planning, for design, for procurement, and finally for construction and onto operations. And so that's our world. And I'm going to kind of talk you through some of the variations of data that apply to life cycle delivery. Next slide, Mike. So I was trying to visualize along the lines of the IAM model, where data applies, and I actually expanded the data, the cost data centric model from the one that we did last fall, and realized that really, data is critical in the asset knowledge enabler component, and really in the risk and review component as well. This is kind of a current visualization of different types of data and how they plug into the different phases of the IAM model. So asset management decision making is clearly you need data that is quick and easy to grab, and it needs to be, it needs to look forward, but it needs to be budgetary. So really you are looking at parametric models, parametric estimating, or using square foot costs or whole building models. Also assemblies, which are kind of bite-sized building components, pricing for bite-sized building components. And that really includes not just new construction, but also maintenance and repair. And so I would posit that parametric costing and assemblies are very appropriate to feed into asset management decision making for budgetary purposes. When we start talking about strategy and planning, forecast and predictive costing can also be of benefit. In terms of the asset knowledge enablers, clearly the technology integration of the data, and the data can be sliced and diced in much more powerful ways when it fits within an IT platform. I know we still have a lot of people that like our books. I was thumbing through one of our cost data books actually this morning, looking for some stuff. But generally, we would say that anytime you're using very granular, robust data set, to be able to have that in an IT system that allows you to use it in more powerful ways is critical. So these are probably the types of RSMeans data that you're very familiar with. As we move into lifecycle delivery and lifecycle delivery systems, there's a different type of data that becomes important. The unit price data, which is a very granular level of data, line item specific, is very frequently used to generate IGEs, independent government estimates, per federal requirements, per FAR requirements. To validate the prices paid and to contractors. But we also now have what we consider to be procurement-worthy data that directly relates to outsourcing of life cycle delivery activities, because when you are outsourcing this type of work, you need a way to govern the pricing, and it needs to be very contractually precise. There cannot be any ambiguity in the data. So for us, if we talk about the precision of the data, we really go from parametric models at the highest, most budgetary level through assemblies, and then finally onto unit price, and then even deeper and more precise into procurement-worthy data, which is even more granular than our unit price database. And then maintenance and repair assemblies, because they have the frequency as well as the cost data, are also often used to govern some of these contracts, although we are very quickly transcending calendar-based maintenance with some of these new technology systems.
Lisa, we have Mike Imony on, and he's with the he's the head of the Asset Knowledge Enablers Work Group. And later on, let's have a discussion about this very interesting aspect of how the information feeds into lifecycle delivery. but let's hold that off till later.
Okay. So then finally, I realized that really a lot of the analytics and the benchmarking costs feed into the risk and review piece of the IAM model. You know, the ability to really analyze project execution, program execution, and then feed back into the planning and decision-making piece. Clearly, we have, you know, if we're talking about different types of data appropriate for different phases of asset management and the life cycle, you know, we have to have a common language and a common way of organizing that data. And I would say that is a continuing struggle, a work in process. You know, Uniformat is a building systems based data structure. Our assemblies are in Uniformat. Master format is really focused on different construction divisions, so material-specific divisions. 42 of them now, it used to be 16, expanded to 42, but those are two very different ways to organize construction and facility cost data. Our databases leverage both for different purposes, but ultimately we are going to have to reconcile these different ways. And there are a couple of efforts that really are focused on that. OmniClass is kind of a new system that incorporates Uniformat but transcends it with other kind of cross-referenced components, data components, and then a really relatively new and still emerging data standard is this ASTM E3035, which is the Facility Asset Component Tracking System. There really is you know, only high-level visionary information on that out there right now, but it continues to develop and is seeking to kind of reconcile many of these different taxonomies and organizational structures.
And there's an ISO standard on facility management coming out that's based on ISO 55000. Oh. So that's something to look for.
So I did not know that, and that will be interesting. I did notice as I was sifting through some of the ISO information that there's a hierarchy. It doesn't come from 55000. It comes from a different reference, but it is a very good multi-layered hierarchy for assets that it looks like can apply to you know, to real property assets, but is not limited to real property assets. So that was an interesting discovery of mine just in the last few days as I was preparing for this. So just to review those different types of data in the RS Means and Gordian world, there is this is an example of a square foot or parametric estimate where really you are looking at square foot costs either for new construction or for facility maintenance and repair. There's actually a lifecycle costing module within our software system that allows you to project out lifecycle costs. And then on to the next slide is an example of an assembly. An assembly is really just a building component specific collection of RS Means or other line items. And so it allows you to estimate in a more effective way because these line items are already bundled together based on engineering input. And you can move on from there. A special type of assembly are facility maintenance and repair assemblies, which are focused on those maintenance and repair tasks. They tend to be very granular, task-based, and also have frequencies associated with them, which really was the only, you know, that is the way that most facility maintenance and repair systems have historically been organized, and it's definitely better than reactive maintenance. But again, I'll emphasize that we are moving towards more intelligent ways of deploying resources in this effort to maintain and repair our our federal building, real property assets, but really any real property assets. There's never enough money to do all of the work that's recommended. So any of these new predictive and technology tools that we have that can help us deploy resources better are a big leap forward. So that's just an example of FMR assemblies. And then I think I have an example of our typical unit price line items, which again are very granular, single item. And then finally, an example of procurement-worthy data, which we define as data that it incorporates another layer of precision from the unit price data. The descriptions are more precise. There are quantity modifiers to adjust prices for large or small quantities. There are demolition prices for most line items. And so it just becomes, there are other modifiers such as working above a certain height. And so we really consider this now to be the standard for any sort of an outsourced contract that is governed by cost data. Rather than using these. The roll-ups are very good when you are when you're trying to predict budgets. They are a very efficient way to do that. But when we're talking about outsourcing, which we're going to turn our attention to shortly, you really need a much more robust and precise type of data.
We've got an extensive comment here from Mike Chipley that I think is worth breaking in to read.
Okay.
Facilities data is now categorized as controlled, unclassified information, technical information, and federal DoD contractors have until December 2017 to complete a cyber risk management plan using NIST SP 800 171. DoD further labels if level 4 data has additional security controls, they have to be added to the baseline. So we'll be asking Mike at the end of this in the discussion to talk more about that, but I wanted to to mention this while we're right in the middle of it.
Great.
So I should move to the next slide.
Next slide, please. So then analytics is really emerging. It's definitely a new endeavor for us at Gordian. We stood up an advanced analytics team about a year and a half ago. But this is the type of data that then closes the loop from risk and review all the way back to planning. So being able to assess, okay, we used cost data and other types of data in the in the life cycle execution, but how did we do? How did our actual execution compare to what was planned and predicted, even with the most granular and precise level of data? And so that is what we are really endeavoring to do at Gordian now, is really look at programs and real property asset portfolios, and analyze how different owners are doing in terms of predicted to actual cost variation across different geographies and time. We normalize the pricing with our location factors and our indices through time, and then we're really able to compare and show, okay, here's where a national owner might be paying more than expected. Here's where they're paying what we would expect, and then we can really begin to dig into some of the reasons. What are some of the causes for pricing overages, and then begin to apply predictive to that, looking at market-specific forces. So a lot of interesting things going on in our advanced analytics department that I really see as hopefully closing the loop. That was the missing piece in that first visual that we did last fall. How do you start to move that data back? How do you analyze the accuracy of the data as it's applied, and then move it back to inform improvements in the data and improvements in planning and decision making?
So, Lisa, what you've done is really encapsulated what we've wanted to do with the work groups this year, is show how all the different work groups work together. And even though you're talking about life cycle, you've done a really great job of touching the data that is needed in life cycle decision making, risk evaluation. Um, you're really tying things together very well.
Yeah. Well, you remember last fall, I took the life cycle group. I said, yeah, that works. Really, any of them work for us because our data influences all of these different components. I took Lifecycle Delivery because I think it was the only one that was unsponsored at the point that I plugged in, and we're delighted to. But absolutely, the data, our data, and cost data and data generally flows throughout the system. It's a matter of how the data is applied and what types of data you need at each phase. And in retrospect, I'm very glad that we ended up with Lifecycle Delivery because under our new ownership, the application of cost data to essentially the execution of the plan, right? The life cycle delivery and execution is where we really have the opportunity to grow and do new things. So our new RS means new owners, Gordian really specializes in long-term IDIQ contracts for facility maintenance, repair, and construction. These are known in the federal space by a number of different names. Job order contracting is probably the most typical and the first. The Air Force calls it SABRE. Sometimes it's single award task order contracts. Those two contracts tend to be focused a little more on cyclical building repairs and upgrades. But when we are talking about a building asset over its life cycle, there are upgrades that must happen through the life cycle to adapt to changing needs. Over more on the true maintenance side, you have base operating support services contracts, and you have facility service contracts, and more federal government is saying this is not our primary mission. And so we want to outsource that. Many DoD installations have gone to these BOSS contracts, they're called, and those tend to be focused on preventative maintenance, repair maintenance, and even ongoing facility maintenance. So, you know, job order contracting really is the forte of Gordian, and they have developed that more precise and more contractually precise level of data to govern these types of contracts. But as I looked at the lifecycle delivery wheel, really these contracts operate at the operate and maintain. These are ways that enterprise owners, especially federal owners, look to operate, maintain, and update their facilities, their real property assets through time. I looked at the acquire and the dispose, and really, like, we talk about acquiring an asset, and I wanted to distinguish between the acquisition of a real property asset, and then you really have the acquisition of the asset operation and maintenance. That may be like a nuance that is a little tough to understand. And sometimes you actually would acquire the asset itself through a contract vehicle that was the latter, that was the asset operation and maintenance contract. So you have acquisition of the service to execute lifecycle delivery, but you also have the initial acquisition of the asset. And I would say, you know, dispose is something that we struggle with in the federal government. We try very much. You know, we have the reduce the footprint mandate, but I would posit that we are not very good at disposing of assets. I mean, that is clear. If you look at the real property inventory of any federal agency, they have a tough time shedding stuff, and it's now an ongoing discussion at VA once again. We've done many rounds of RAC within DoD to try to reduce some of those facility assets, but disposal is a little bit of a challenge. Can you go back a couple of slides, Mike?
If you can, very quickly make the point, yes, because we need to move on.
One more forward.
Oh.
Forward. There you go. So then I was really looking at outsourcing and effective outsourcing of lifecycle delivery, and looking to again relate it to those other IAM components, and the importance of cultural alignment and relational support when you are outsourcing these activities, making sure that you have a common culture within the organization. Again, the collaborative technology, having a platform for the effective transfer of information between the outsourced, the contractor that you're outsourcing these activities to, and the owner, and then finally managing the safety. The safety piece is critical, but also really managing the price and the risk of price. And many times an outsourced contract is a matter of risk transfer, and you have to transfer risk in an appropriate way. Whoever can best manage the risk should own the risk. But there is safety risk, there is price risk, and those things have to be considered in the outsourcing model.
And now we need to transfer over to Bob Smith. So if we can make Bob the presenter. Thank you. And thank you, Lisa. Like I said, it was great that you were connecting to all the different elements through Lifecycle. So Bob, we see pending license, please activate, but if you could start your slide.
How about that?
That's better.
Okay.
And then if you can go full screen, it would be even better yet.
Yeah, this is about as big as I can make it where you can see the pieces of it.
Okay.
I kind of experimented with it. Yeah, again, my name is Bob Smith. I've been with ALN since the beginning. Back in, I think we had a meeting back in December of 2013 to form the Asset Leadership Network. And it's been a great organization, a lot of good things that we're doing. I work for a company called Commissioning Agents. They're headquartered out of Indianapolis. They work primarily in highly regulated industries, and I think the bulk of our work is in the pharmaceutical biotech area. And all I want to do today is just give you a quick overview of the life cycle model that we've kind of put together. When we look at all the bits and pieces that have to go together to deliver a good manufacturing facility. That's primarily what we work in that realm. And I'll explain what this model is called here in just a second. The 5 pieces that we looked at when we put this model together, again, with staffing, project management, the process side, quality, and the facility. And let me scan down. Well, just a real quick one on why we pulled this model together. The big thing for the pharmaceutical and biotech area is by the time they get a patent approved and then actually launch their first product, get it out into the marketplace, can be 7 to 10 years. And I think a patent's typically only, the patent agreement's for like 17 years. So it's a very long process to get a product to market. And with this model, we're hoping to basically we can accelerate the time to market, decrease costs, and hopefully reduce risk. We call this the chemistry of full-scale operations. And this is just a very high-level overview of the process where we break it down into the various sections, into the project, the process, the staff, the facility, and a little farther down is the quality piece of it. But we wanted to show the major points along the way when you're going through a project, and then where the touch points are as you flow down into actually developing and transitioning the process over into a manufacturing side, and then how the staffing, how all the facility components come together, and then at the bottom, the various stages as far as how quality is involved in this, because quality is definitely the key component to any kind of a pharmaceutical or biotech manufacturing facility. We won't go into any great detail, but I just wanted to use this as an example of just how we look at this. One of my challenges I've got now is with the ISO 55000 standard and asset management. I'm going to overlay exactly where implementing an ISO 55001 program, how it will affect all of this and how it will streamline and hopefully improve this whole process. So that's my next challenge at my company, is to take our current model and then show how applying the ISO 55000 standards and fundamentals and management practices, how that's going to improve this process. That was my spiel.
But you also had an interesting conversation this week that I'd like you to report on.
The one with Oxan?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, there's a company in France that does business board games, and they've developed an asset management. They've done a life cycle costing and several other management board games. Mike and I have both had some conversations with a gentleman from France about this, and it's unique in a way that it engages people, and it's real world examples. It teaches people best practices in kind of a fun environment, so we're kind of excited about trying to partner with them, and maybe for our next conference that we have coming up in the fall, maybe have them present and maybe even conduct a workshop where we can actually use their asset management board game to kind of help people better understand the way all the pieces fit together for the ISO 55000 standard.
Excellent. So I guess we can go back to my screen, where I will just have some placeholder slides as I ask Jim Dieter and Bob Kaler, long-term colleagues, if you can share some thoughts and insights on life cycle issues for implementation of an asset management plan.
Well, Bob, you want to go first then?
Well, sure, and I'll do that, Jim, and feel free to add anything at any time. I come at this, and I think Jim does to an extent, from a little different perspective, in that we are really in the personal property world as opposed to the real property world. They're still assets. They still have to be part of the overall asset management plan, especially as we look at ISO 55000, 55001, and what we're looking at. But the three things that I think that are really important at a high level to consider, from a personal property perspective, is that, one, we have to recognize that there are disciplines within disciplines around property management. We've got everything from fleet to IT to movement and transportation. We've got calibration. We've got production line support. We've got physical inventory activities. We've got sensitive items that may be in a classified area. Each of those require different types of procedures, processes, people, as well as the kinds of data that you collect. So when we go to implement an asset management plan, we have to really understand that we're not going to try and come up with a one-size-fits-all. In fact, that would be very disruptive to getting the maximum value out of our assets. What we really need to do is look at our plan and make sure that we cover all of the individual disciplines and give people the ability to use their best practices within these disciplines, which in themselves can be quite expansive with their own industry groups and best practices that they deploy. So it's really important that when we look at implementing a system, it's very important we pay attention to that. We've seen that at Sunflower System, especially in the federal government. I think that something close to half of the federal civilian government are managing assets, especially their personal property, using sunflower. So we've had a lot of experience in looking at that. So making sure that you provide the ability for each discipline to work to their best practice, and the overlying is to meet their mission objectives. And then every customer has different mission objectives, so it becomes somewhat complex, and you just need to break it down. The second thing that is important for us to consider is that there are a lot of different ways that the data can be acquired that we want to capture throughout our process to be able to manage our life cycle very well. There are direct input into the system. There's mobile technologies. There's RFID. There's other automated information technologies. There is system integration, and then more and more we're looking at sensor-based and the Internet of Things. So being able to recognize the different ways that we get this information, how we're going to grab it, and how we're going to process that data to capture what we need is really critical, because we, again, need to support the activities of the people managing the assets in order to have an effective overall corporate or enterprise-wide asset management strategy. And then the third thing that I think is the linchpin is that we need to integrate our data into actionable intelligence. And in fact, Lisa was talking about that a little bit earlier with analytics, and we too play with analytics. Obviously, our analytics is going to be significantly different, because we're going to be looking at a lot of different things around personal property assets than you would with real property assets. So it's important to look at that, but we need to consolidate that data. And as was expressed earlier, some of that data may be sensitive or compartmentalized, and we need to make sure that we've got the systems in place to ensure that that data is only kept in those places where it's needed, and yet it's available in those places where it's needed. We also, in the fact that we're working with a lot of different systems potentially, you know, if we look at fleet and IT and a lot of those other disciplines may be using their own systems, but we need to capture that information at an enterprise level in order to turn it into an actionable intelligence. So that requires establishing your metadata. And again, you know, what are we going to name in the nomenclature, and how are we going to view our data at a meta level? And there are some standards. We talked, you know, in the personal property world, the ASTM E53 group, which was led by Jim Dieter, has quite a number of standards. I think there's 27 standards right now, and that includes nomenclature and description of asset information and what information you need to capture. So there's work there that's been done to help people understand that. But at the end of the day, it's really important to look at your data through, you know, the 4 V's, right? The volume of data, which is important as we're looking at more mobile and automated information gathering, whether it's sensor-based and IoT. You know, what's the volume of the data and the velocity of data? How fast is that data coming in? And then the veracity of data. How much do we believe that data? And then the 4th V obviously is value. So we have to look at those and say how much data we're getting, what's going to be valuable, what do we need to capture, what do we not need to capture, what is not going to be effective information. And in the end, yeah, you capture your data across your enterprise, from which you can then apply your analytics against everything that you're looking at. And then from the, you know, in the personal property world, there is heavy excess and disposal process. In many of my customers, half of what they need to put in terms of effort goes to dispositioning their equipment. You know, how do they get rid of it? And there's a lot of things that have to be done as part of the life cycle, you know, from sanitation to environmental concerns, to how we are going to potentially reuse that equipment or put it into service in another life cycle where it can add value. So, you know, when we look at that, at the life cycle, it's a little bit different than real property in terms of subject matter, but it's the same in terms of needing to capture the information, a lot of different things, and then how do we take that information and turn it into actionable intelligence for our organization.
Excellent.
So that's a perfect place for me to jump in. I think we really covered this topic very well from a variety of different perspectives. Interestingly, from a historical perspective, as we were working on ISO 55000, it took us 3 years to come up with the definition of life cycle. And I did it. I came up with the definition. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words. And we have really long definitions and a lot of ideas about what it should be and what it shouldn't be and how it's different for personal property and real property and infrastructure and all those things. But you have to stop for a second and say, asset life cycle. That's why it's just life cycle. Mike, you throw up that next slide that you had there for me. So this is has to be attributed to Tony McGrail of Doble, and he said asset life cycle is the theory that that boats have baby boats. So assets don't really have a life cycle. You know, they don't have offspring. You know, they're sort of linear things. So an asset life is a period of an asset from its creation to the end of life. So it's interesting that that's really quite different. If you're in facilities, is different from infrastructure, is different from personal property. Infrastructure, we almost always construct, and we have it that whole life. You know, whatever that might be. Facilities, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And personal property, almost certainly we only have that asset for part of that life. When you buy a car, you know, the car is already constructed. It's already had its beginning of life, and hopefully it goes on to someone else after you have it, so it has some life after that. So that when you talk about life cycle, it's really not an asset life cycle, which led to the definition that life cycle is the stages involved in the management of an asset. So it really isn't that what we're thinking about on all those charts about, you know, the one from the IAM that Mike was talking about, from Jack Kelly's presentation, the one that Lisa talked about, the one that Bob talked about. It's really a management activity. It's not about that cycle isn't the asset. The cycle is the management of the asset. You know, very much to Bob just said about, you know, from acquisition through disposition, and, you know, a lot of focus on disposition and the federal government. So if you use that car analogy, that you know, that when the car was owned by Ford Motor Company, you know, they started the asset life, and they had their management cycle, life cycle for it, which is produce, you know, get it out to a distributor, to a dealer who sells it, and there you go, depending on how you want to break that all down. And that's their, you know, management cycle for that asset. They might have some ongoing responsibility around maintenance, interesting to think about, and how that can overlap from the time that I buy the car and my management cycle of the car begins. And I plan for having the car, and I acquire the car, and you know, I maintain the car, might have warranty maintenance. That's kind of the interesting crossover, you know, and then I get use from it and get the value from that asset and from the management of the asset. So it's an interesting, life cycle is a really core key concept in ISO 55000, but it's really kind of the bottom of where the standard goes to. because things get much more operational and technical after that, and it's a very strategic standard. But it emphasizes that it's a management system standard, not a management of asset standard. But obviously, all of us are involved in one way or another in those specific assets. And I think it's a distinction in the U.S. that we are particularly good at knowing how to manage those individual assets and asset portfolios, but we've been lacking on the management system side. Internationally, it's kind of reversed, where they haven't been quite so good on managing the assets, but they've been much greater uptake on the management system perspective. Of course, which doesn't have anything to do with the fact that the politicians don't let anybody repair the bridges or the metro systems when they're supposed to. But it's not from a lack of knowledge on how to do that.
So, Jim, let's start. We've got quite a few questions, and one of them is going to require Mike Chipley to be turned on. So if we could get him set to speak, but hold off a second. So Sandy Barsky said that she likes the idea of the board game and asked what other tools are there to use to promote asset management. And Jim, I thought maybe you could suggest some things that the leaders could use to help them improve their decision to spend.
Decisions so within an organization is what you're describing?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that the key is to raise the awareness level at upper levels of the organization. From an ALN perspective, we are focused on having an impact at the policy and senior management level. That's what we're about. There's lots of great professional associations, the NPMA, that Bob and I belong to, real property associations, SMRP, et cetera, that work at the professional level, so we don't need to recreate those. But impacting at the policy and top management level is the key. And in your organization, whatever position you are in the organization, how do you get that message out to the upper level? One final thought is when we were looking at the publishment of ISO 55000 in 2014, we said it'd be really great if in the U.S. we could get a major business publication to have a story about asset management. Wouldn't that be awesome? Because nobody was talking about it. And my gosh, now we are all over the place. It's in The Economist, it's in Bloomberg, it's in conversations everywhere around the talk with the new Congress and administration on infrastructure, et cetera. Asset management is a spin. So that's what we're working on from our perspective to raise the awareness of organizational leaders so that people with expertise and interest within the organization can find a willing ear when they get that audience or elevator speech.
And Sandy, we really can't go into it, but Kimon Onuma and the Onuma team has established BIMStorm, which is a way to use online tools to show how to improve asset management. And Kimon will be getting into some of that next week. You can contact us about that pretty effective tool. It's not quite a game, but it's a good practice. And then if Mike Chipley is available, there's a question about the announcement today about the cybersecurity executive order. And I don't know, Mike, if you've had any chance to look at that, but if you can address what you think that might, the impact it might have on life cycle of information assets.
You bet. Can you hear me okay, Mike?
Yes.
Okay, so there was an executive order that was a couple of years back that standardized data across the federal government, and it was required then the National Archives to come up with a standard nomenclature, and then that was published, and so our new technical term is called Controlled Unclassified Information, CUI, and then the subcategory is Technical Information, which then includes facilities, fleet, and equipment type data, BIM models, CAD drawings, specifications, all the facilities type data that we were talking about today. The next part of that was then the Department of Defense issued a change to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the DFARS, in December 2015 that then had a 2-year period for all contractor vendors to implement a cybersecurity data security program, and they are compliance date is December 2017. I have not seen OMB issue the final rule, and they have not updated the system of award management in the certs and reps section yet that is indicating that it's ready to go live. But again, we've not seen any relief either. So if you're a federal contractor for DoD and you have any of the facilities type data, your IT business systems are now going to be required to have the same level of security as the DoD IT systems. And if you have not begun that process, then highly recommend that you start doing some resource investigation and then start putting together your plan. I've put out a couple of articles in the National Institute of Building Sciences about it, but it still seems to be that very few folks or businesses are aware of this upcoming requirement.
Well, maybe the executive order today will spark some more interest in that.
Absolutely, I agree.
May I speak to that briefly?
Let us allow our everybody to go if they need to go, and thank everyone. Bob Kaler had to jump off, but we will stay after class and continue the discussion. But if you have to go now, thank you for joining us. So yes, now go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I was, it's a great question. I am not familiar with all of the details of the specific requirements, but definitely as we are trying to break down information silos because the information is more valuable when it is interconnected rather than having, the cost data here and the facility data here. But as you break down the silos, there is greater security risk, because it is possible for somebody that breaches the security to get a better feel for federal facility assets. The more that data is connected, and then remember that I was talking about the collaborative piece, that we want to provide a collaboration platform for government and outsourced contractors, and obviously there's security risk involved with that, and we're looking at the FedRAMP standard, which then, we understand there's reciprocity with DISA as one way to provide that level of security to contractors, if you can provide a cloud-based system that complies with federal security standards.
Excellent. Thank you. Mike Shipley, were you saying something? Did I interrupt?
Nope, but Lisa hit a key point. So FedRAMP actually just updated all of the templates that are required for your NIST SP 800-171. So the 800-171 process is a smaller subset of the larger NIST 853. So all those templates that are on the FedRAMP site are perfect for any business to use to create their cybersecurity management plan. In addition, we programmed 800-171 into the Department of Homeland Security's cybersecurity evaluation tool, the CSET tool. It's version 8.0, January 2017. So if you download that tool, which is free, it has 800-171 incorporated into it, and then you can generate your system security plan, one of the key first documents, with that particular tool. So Lisa hit a key point with mentioning FedRAMP.
So there's a question about the agent masking the agency's name and adding the data to the aggregate. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Does anybody who was speaking pick up on what that might have been addressing?
What is the question again?
About masking the agency's name and just adding the data to the aggregate.
I'm not sure. I've heard aggregate data risk referred to quite a bit. That's the idea that one small piece of facility data for one project would not be at risk, but when you aggregate it, across the country, across an entire installation, it becomes riskier because there are connections between the data. But I'm not sure that was the intention.
Okay, sorry, I'm not able to interpret that question well enough. And then there was a question for you, Lisa, going back 1 second here. I'm sorry, where is this? It was withdrawn, so addresses the security. Yeah, so what you were saying is what she was asking about was when it's aggregated, how do you address the security of that data? Mike Shipley, do you have any input on that when you aggregate the data, how to address the security?
So within what's called the confidentiality, integrity, and availability portion of your system security plan, there's 10 or 11 questions that deal with does the data get aggregated? Is there Privacy Act information? Is there critical infrastructure or key asset information? So when you answer these special questions, aggregated data bumps you right up into the high impact level, and that's the concern. So in most cases, I would say our facilities data, by definition, is academic data. You got the keys to the kingdom once you get into the technical information contained within our facilities data.
Okay. And then there was the question earlier about shared services related to Lifecycle. Lisa, were you able to think about that?
I am a little bit familiar with shared services, but I don't know that I can speak intelligently to how it impacts real property asset management. I mean, when I think of shared services, I think of things like the shared payroll services and more administrative type of shared services. I know that there's this huge category management effort by GSA to create contract vehicles that can be used by a number of federal agencies, and the idea is to aggregate and aggregate spend and thus drive down prices, as well as provide increased visibility into prices paid. I'm not sure if that really speaks to the issue of shared services, but the category management and the development of some of these new strategic contracts by GSA is certainly one way to provide efficiencies for federal government.
Okay.
Yeah, shared services is a huge, that's another thing. That's anything you want it to look like depends on what ballpark you're playing in and what context you're speaking of, I believe, to really make sense of the question.
Hey Mike, this is Kimon. Can I make a comment?
Please, I was just going to ask if you had any insight on shared services.
I just want to kind of build up on some of this theme of the shared services and security aspect to the aggregation of facility data. I think the fact that a lot of our systems today aggregated into a monolithic structure is the reason that the security level goes up. But if you look at the screen we're looking at right now, the GoToMeeting is basically a shared service. We're all on the GoToMeeting website, but we're only seeing the people and the interaction that is happening between us. So there are technologies out there that allow us to create a transaction and say you can only see, who are you and what can you see, and we need to think in terms of that, because as assets get more connected, it's going to be absolutely impossible to manage it in the monolithic structure that most of the asset management systems currently use. So we need to think in terms of services, small services, and giving packages of information to the person that's asking for that information. And that's going to be a way how we're going to be able to start tackling the security issue by looking beyond the limitations we have right now.
That's how the security is being addressed in many other areas already, and we need to adopt what's working.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you've all been very good students, and almost everyone has stayed after class. We appreciate your interest in the topic, and please join us again next week. Thank you to our speakers, Lisa Cooley, Bob Smith, Bob Kaler, Jim Dieter, and thank you to our sponsor, Onuma Inc. And see you all next week.
Thanks.